What if there were a medicine that could heal almost anything?
That would be great.
But they didn't want you to know about it.
Sorry, who's they?
Some people are following me, and I brought my tortoise.
From executive producers Mike Judge and Greg Daniels and co-creators Joe Bennett and Steve Healy comes an animated comedy thriller about what it takes to change the world. Common Side Effects. New episodes, Sundays at 11:30 p.m. on Adult Swim. Now streaming on Max.
Sonoro.
On this episode, we welcome back climate justice leader Marce Gutiérrez-Graudiņš and discuss her unwavering commitment to keep our oceans clean and to galvanizing the Latine community to get involved. We discuss the threat that this administration poses on climate conservation efforts and what lessons we can take from environmental disasters like the recent Los Angeles fires. Marce is the founder of Azul, the first U.S. organization dedicated to elevating Latinx voices in ocean justice. As two bicultural Mexicanas, you'll also hear us briefly discuss Emilia Perez, the controversial musical that hasn't stopped making headlines, and probably will make new headlines by the time you're listening to this. All right, enjoy the show. Welcome to
Tamarindo Podcast.
Hosted by me, Brenda Gonzalez, a fitness coach, political nerd, and nonprofit capacity builder.
And me, Delsy Sandoval, a Guatemalan-American licensed therapist and passionate creativity advocate. Together, we're here to uplift our community through powerful conversations with changemakers, creatives, and healers.
Each week on the pod, we talk politics, culture, and personal development. Listeners call Tamarindo the Advocacy and Self-Love Podcast. Vámonos! Let's start the show. Hola, Marce. It's good to have you back on Tamarindo. How are you?
Muy bien. Thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to be back.
Yeah. So as we start these conversations, we usually do a temperature check or ¿qué pasa? So how are you feeling on this final day of January? Finally.
Oh man, I will say it's a crazy week, personally and like just everything that's going on. So it's been a crazy week, but mala hierba nunca muere. So here we are.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we always record a little before this episode comes out. I mean, there's like endless horrible news to react to. I think everyone's just feeling the weight of this January in a way that we've never felt before. But I am always energized by talking to amazing people that regardless with what's happening and what the world throws at us, they are not pulled away from their mission. So that's what I think of when I think of Marce and your work with Azul. So we're going to dive right in, and I have a few questions for you. So you were recently featured in an NBC story about your work. It was your leadership. You're part of a delegation, the U.S. delegation, working towards a global treaty to curb plastic pollution. Can you tell us about that experience and tell us why we don't have a treaty yet?
Yes, thank you. So I will say I was part of the civil society U.S. delegation. So how this works, what the big picture is. When you hear, for example, about the climate COP, and we hear about the climate treaty and the COP 26, COP this, what that means is the conference of the parties, which means it's a treaty. So what we're working towards right now is to get a plastic COP, right? So all the countries came together about 2 years ago and they voted in their UN Assembly, Environmental Assembly, and said, we need to do something about plastic. We need to do something about plastic pollution. Please go and negotiate a treaty on this, an instrument as they call it. And so they said, please do it by the end of 2024. We had 5 rounds of negotiations. Why don't we still have one? Oh my God, because there's a lot of people dragging their feet, right? So there's a couple of things here. On one hand, yes, I wish we had it already. On the other hand, you don't want to have a bad treaty baked in because it's super hard to come back and fix it after the fact. So it's better to take a little bit longer and do it better in the negotiation state. How was this? I mean, it's a dream come true because as I was a child growing up in Mexico, for some reason, I always was interested. Well, I grew up in Tijuana, so the international idea and the just living that way was part of like baked in growing up there. So I was always interested in diplomacy and in international relations, etc. At one point, I thought about going into this, and why I didn't is like a longer story, but it was something that I considered at one point. So to be in these rooms 20 years later, to be in these rooms where diplomats are negotiating, to be in these rooms where we're able to propose ideas, to help the delegations. And so the way that I would describe it is kind of like, if I fully expect that amongst your listeners, there's a lot of people that are very well versed at advocacy and lobbying and social change. And so you do that social change and that lobbying and that advocacy with your decision makers, right? So you try to get senator, assembly member, city council member, whomever you do. So it's a little bit like that, except that a bigger picture, right? So in the end, we have a lot of ideas, but the people that are taking the decisions, that are making those final votes, are the countries, the delegates representing the countries. So it is a dream come true. It's like exciting, very, very tiring, but also just really rewarding to be able to work some of our fabulous folks that I've been working with for about 6 years, with new folks, etc. So it's also like very interesting because I get to kind of step on both worlds, which I've done forever, which is as a stakeholder or rights holder with the U.S. delegation, and also as a Mexican citizen with the Mexican delegation and the whole of the Latin American delegation, which, by the way, is strongly part of the driving the ambition forward on this treaty.
That's great. And I want to back up a little bit. We have a mutual friend, Julio Ricardo Varela, who wanted to make sure that we had our listeners get to hear from you again. You're not a stranger to Tamarindo, so you've been here before. And what Julio emphasizes that you're one of the few, or maybe the only Latina Mexican American in those rooms, the way, with your experience as somebody that grew up in Tijuana, that's an immigrant, lives in San Diego, that has that border experience, border life. Is that true? Like, what is it like being in those rooms? Do you see yourself as a lonely person in these rooms, or what's that like?
I'm probably one of few. I don't like to make the blanket statements of being the only one because there's probably more people. But I'm one of very few, if that. Especially like being able to like actually speak to both, this group of people, which is the delegates from Latin America and the U.S. So there's a handful of us that can do that, relative to being both Mexican and that, I would say right now, yes. Yeah, I'm one of few.
Yeah, and how cool, right? How cool to be able to navigate, to use that strength that you have as just your innate lived experience to help you be able to navigate that. And this is a curveball. I mean, I had a whole bunch of questions for you that have to do with the work that Azul does and what drives you. But just a little bit of a curveball here. Right now, and this is totally irrelevant to pollution and climate change, but have you seen Emilia Perez? I'm curious.
I have not seen it.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
But I have followed all of it. I don't want to see it because I do not want to spend money on that movie. I will tell you that I did see Johannes Sacre Bleu, which is
I can't wait to
the
see
one that was actually made in Mexico, and I love it. It's a really meaty conversation. I was very conflicted at the beginning of the discussion relative to some of the does she speak Spanish well enough, etc. But when you see the bigger picture and you don't maybe reduce it to I always want to make sure that I'm not reducing Latino-ness or Latinidad to language, right? But if you can look at the bigger picture and where people are concerned, especially in Mexico, I am I'm not spending money on that anytime soon. I'm sorry. Maybe in a little bit. Also with the interactions that we've seen this week with some of the stars and how they portray themselves and the things that keep coming up. Let's just say I've watched Johanna Sacre Blue a couple of times, and I probably will watch Emilia Perez at some point, but I'm loving the Sacre Blue one for now.
Yes, and the reason why I asked is because, again, you and I and many of our listeners of this podcast have that unique ability to navigate those two things, and so I totally am with you. Do not spend money, but if you already have Netflix, if you want to hate watch it, I do think I'd be really curious to hear your impressions. What is so interesting to me is that my parents actually really liked it, which is so funny to me. It's so funny to me. But just to let our listeners know, I will go ahead and link this in our show notes. The what you keep referencing is a Mexican response to Emilia Perez. It is a satire that is all based on French stereotypes, which is exactly what Emilia Perez is. It's a French filmmaker making a story based on Mexican stereotypes. So, yeah. Okay, I digress. Going back to climate change.
No, but it's a very, and I keep thinking about this without going back into that. I keep thinking about this because it's such a layered conversation, right? So when we heard, and so I think that you and I are in a very specific little corner of the internet where we see, and I keep actually measuring, like I keep seeing the things that are coming from the US into Mexico about 2 weeks before they hit Mexico, and then vice versa, right? So we're like in that middle of like fully like inhabiting both like digital spaces, right? And so on one hand, there's a lot of the conversation in Mexico and parts of Latin America that doesn't quite understand the Latinidad in the US and what that is like and how people may or may not identify, et cetera, and vice versa, right? So yeah, I was very conflicted at the beginning, especially considering Mr. Derbez's like history of how he talks about things before. But yeah, the bigger picture, if I look at it from like, this man, the just, and I will see it at one point, right? But like just looking at this person, the director, just disregarding completely like the way that he talks about it. Oh, I don't need to go to Mexico. I don't need to take that into account. And having grown up in Tijuana, of all places, at the height of the, 90s and 2000s and seeing what that was firsthand, it's like,
yeah, very irresponsible. And I know we should totally drop this topic, but it's just so fun, right? It's fun to pepper in some pop culture.
It's very specific, yeah.
When you see the movie, I think you will notice that something that happens too in the internet spaces that we navigate is that sometimes there's like this rush to feel righteous, and there is a righteous conversation about Mexicans criticizing language acquisition. There is a righteous argument about that. When you see the film, you'll see that it's not so much that he's minimizing Selena Gomez's Latinidad. I think it goes back to, and at least this was my problem with it, is that, again, it goes back to this very, very insensitive way to approach this story with not enough Mexicans involved. Because there could be experiences like Selena Gomez's character allegedly is Mexican American. Look, we will mess up the Spanish. That is a normal and real experience. It's more that the dialogue that she had to say is so unrealistic for a Mexican, like a Mexican American. That's the problem. It goes back to the filmmaker. So,
right, like always, all of these issues, you have to look at like the biggest like power broker there and the power wielder versus, and I'm not saying she doesn't have agency or et cetera, but like, where does that problem start? And it's not with her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So back to more pressing issues, which is climate change and the incredible work that you lead. I want to know, like we mentioned, this is like the longest January ever. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've got this trash of a president. And I want to know, how is Azul pivoting or bracing yourself or adjusting to an administration that is very unfriendly to any progress around climate change and the work that you lead? What are your thoughts right now with this administration? How is it making your work more difficult?
About 1,000%. looking into the past, and just to give you an example. So yes, it is extremely difficult for any and all climate folks. And we can talk about, well, they're going so far as scrubbing information, getting rid of information, attacking bedrock laws, attacking, funding, etc. But then you're layering the fact that we are at a very, again, that very specific crossroads of Latinos and oceans, which is very specific for us. And in the past, when we dealt with, for example, back in, I think 2018, 2019, that there was an effort to try to expand offshore drilling, which, by the way, asked me about what we did right before he came on into office about that. Back then, there was all these protests against, obviously, like expanding offshore drilling. And yet, the whole ocean movement, which is still, it's moving in the right direction, but it's still overwhelmingly white, was talking about it. And here we are looking at that particular day of rallying, which is the day after the DREAM Act Day of Action. And then looking with the folks that we're working with, which is like Latinas, Latinos, that are telling me, Marcela, I really feel for this, but I don't feel comfortable lobbying, speaking to the federal government that is persecuting. We can come to this part of the lobby, with or this part of the rally, which is on state grounds, and this was in Sacramento, but I'm not going to go to the federal building. Like, I'm not exposing myself and having to then go back and explain to my colleagues, no, you cannot push people to do this. They're not going to risk their welfare. And so I replay this in my mind over and over again, because that is what's going to happen. And the fact is that some people are not going to feel comfortable even talking to the state government or the local government. And I don't blame them. And so we're coming up with a different idea of where folks can take their advocacy if they feel comfortable. And that's the other one, right? I have to check myself and check our team. And that's a conversation that we've had about do I really do I have a public that is interested in hearing about maximum sustainable yield and relative to fisheries laws on the same week that they're being persecuted and there's ICE raids and there are people demonizing and ostracizing them? No, take a beat, right? So we're having to be extremely, extremely, flexible and empathetic, ideally. And we look at our poll and that feeling is still there. Latinos are still extremely progressive relative to ocean conservation, but it's about how we do that, right? So we're taking a beat. We're going to be pulling out of some of our sort of artwork and the music and the joy part of it and going from there, because you have to read the room, basically.
Interesting, because as you're in these spaces, as you mentioned, there maybe aren't that many Latino-led organizations that are, front and center on climate change or on ocean conservation or the issues that you work on. But your peers might be, they're mostly white, right? How do you also take your role to maybe get those folks on board on the other issues, these immigration issues, and how do we build bridges across issues?
I will say that we have seen, pardon the pun, sea change in the last 4 years, both in the environmental movement and the ocean movement. We still have a lot of work to do, but at one point here in California, and we do, most of our advocacy work has been in California, and there was we were doing some work on coastal protection. And that same day, there was a very big delegation of United Farm Workers people, including at the time the director, that were talking about getting a law that would give them, I want to say, overtime. And they needed those environmental votes, what they call the environmental votes. And none of my colleagues was trying to go there. Oh, well, do we really want to go there? Do we and I just se las canté, I just said, this is where it's at. Listen, here's how this affects people. Here's how, you spell it out for them. You always, and then you like, if that really doesn't land, then you go back and you say, you're always asking me how we can collaborate. You're always asking how we can build those bridges. Well, you build those bridges and you collaborate by showing up for people. And right now, this is the time to show up for people. And so, some people are like, well, maybe what if I take people off? I'm like, yeah, you are. Like, you're going to do that. And so you have to weigh that out about what is more important. Am I going to possibly inconvenience someone, or am I going to, build that bridge? And for example, I can tell you that for me, one of my grandparents, when my grandfather on my mother's side, I never met him because he died very young. He was a bracero. And my only connection to him, my only tangible connection to him is his UFW paperwork from when I helped my grandmother get her pension, that how they got the pension put aside and never got it. And I did the paperwork for her. And my only connection to my grandfather is his UFW paperwork. So am I going to step away from things like that? No. And this is why it's important to have people of all places, to have people of all backgrounds be part of the ocean movement, of the climate movement, et cetera, because there's all these connections that may not be completely clear to folks, but that are our lived experience, that are clear to us. And so I was talking to them, I said, how do you not see the connection with the people that are toiling in the fields, that are feeding you, that are affected by climate change, that are affected by droughts, that are affected by, et cetera, that are having to deal with the actual impacts every single day that you may not feel because you're inside a air conditioned, back then we had office, et cetera, et cetera. So think about that and think about where you should be showing up for people like that. Even you should be showing up for them because you want to build bridges and be an ally. But even if you didn't, and you were just looking for a self-serving sort of intersection, it's because here's the connection, right? So it's a lot easier these days. People are a lot more open to listening. So I'm very thankful for that. But that was maybe, that's where things have changed in the last, let's say, 10 years.
Okay, we talked a little about global policy. We talked about the federal government. Let's bring it to California. So, I'm here in Los Angeles. We just experienced devastating fires. There was also some fires in Chula Vista. So I want to know, this is kind of bringing this stuff home, right? We are experiencing climate change every single day. So what lessons can we take from this disaster and how it could maybe help us be more connected to protecting the environment? What lessons can we take from this recent experience?
There's several layers, right? So the first one is climate change. So it's climate changed, right? So we now see climate change. So in other places, and somebody was talking about the fires in LA, and they were talking about them by comparing them to a hurricane, relative to it's the winds, and the same way that you wait for I don't know enough about the response, but there was obviously a lot of maligning and a lot of misinformation, and thinking about fires in a very localized way, in a very specific way, versus how is a systemic issue? How is these the humidity, lack of humidity, the et cetera, lack of water, et cetera. And so I think there's obviously it's climate change. It's the lack of rain, one of the driest winters that we've had, these underlying conditions that build up to create that, perfect storm, imperfect storm. And what really I think is super urgent to me is the misinformation. The misinformation it's an urgent issue to deal with, because that could be dangerous to people. When you're having this amount of nonsense going around as people are dealing with this thing, or people are trying to, and I don't live in LA, but my brother does, and we are keeping an eye on okay, do you move, do you not move? Of course, Necio, he didn't want to move until the last minute, and this and that. And trying to cut through that. And I'm looking at my mother's experience of okay, she's mostly a Spanish media consumer. Where is she getting this stuff? how are other people that may not have access to this, et cetera, looking at it. And so like what's super urgent to me and going forward is the misinformation. And how people are actually taken into account into disaster planning in a place like LA, the narrative talking about like, todos los ricos, all these rich people, without like regarding the folks that sustain that, the folks that motor, like that power, rather not motor power, all of LA, in what is one of the largest Spanish speaking cities in the world. Right. And so I think the urgency is, yes, of course, we need to talk about the climate change policies. We need to talk about whether, you know, I need to go back and read it, but there was a whole thing about how like there was a lot of like fire engines that were actually not in
operable. There were some,
because of like, let's go back to that later. But like, there's a climate risk. There's the water risk, which is clear and present in Southern California, especially. And then there's the societal and the justice risk, which is relative to, I think, like in an urgent way to me, the information. How do people access information? How do people access like the resources, and how to respond to that? So that to me is like the most urgent and actionable thing in front of us.
And I also want to say that I think the mass misinformation actually distracts from the climate change conversation, because there's people think,
well, that's the purpose, right? I mean, some of that is on purpose. Yeah.
It's kind of pointing to like, well, maybe it was arson, or maybe it was Edison, or like people are forgetting it was also this incredible windstorm, you know, and the dryness. That is climate changed. I really like that takeaway of really thinking about the climate is changed, and we need to have equitable response and to be knowledgeable about how we get that information, the accurate information shared.
Accurate information and resources, yes. And so, you know, I would say to people the same way that we think about, you know, possibly other types of storms in the East Coast relative to, oh my God, we're getting like the stronger hurricanes, et cetera. This is our version of that. This is our version of that climate changed. This is what it looks like in California.
All right. So what would you like to, I mean, it sounds like one of the things you'd like to see more of is let's get some more accurate and culturally relevant information out to folks. But what else would you like to see? Yes, that we could do so much better. What would you like to see more of to inspire more Latina folks to get engaged in these issues?
I think opportunities. So let me put it this way, and I'll go back to our poll. We did a poll last year, which is a national poll. And by national, I do mean 2,500 people polled, not like the New York Times, it was like 900 people that were polling and like running around with that. And so we did a poll, and the numbers are there in a significant way. So Latinos are extremely, or Latino voters are extremely supportive of ocean conservation policies. 80% told us that they were more likely to vote for a candidate that they saw as an ocean conservation leader. 80% told us that they were more likely that they saw the ocean as part of our culture and our traditions. And then we can go back into details of like, you know, the support, overwhelming support on like, you know, 70s and et cetera, 80% on do we care about protecting ocean, like marine protected areas, stopping offshore drilling, you know, like illegal, unregulated fishing. So all of that is there. But I think what we still need a lot to do is the avenues of engagement. So like, and that is, yes, in the public. So please, you know, reach out to the folks that see in front of you, the opportunities that you see in front of us. But like as a civil society, as the ocean field, like we need to inspire people more. So I think that sometimes, and I will say the collective we here as like the left or like the, you know, social change, et cetera, and a very like mainstream social change, we think that, well, we have the science, we have the law, we're right, so everybody should just come to us, right? And so we don't actually spend enough time trying to inspire people. So like, I think that it's our work as social, you know, justice people, as people that do this work on the daily, that we're the ones that need to be thinking about how we inspire folks. And so, yes, if you right now see that and hear this and you feel inspired, give us a call. Go online. If not us, find your local group. And if there's not a group, start one. Reach out to someone to get help you with those resources. And I would be remiss if I don't say azul.org, www.azul.org. But I think that it's on us to inspire people. And so what I tell folks about our work at Azul is that we translate, but we're not translating from English to Spanish. We're translating opportunities. So our job is thinking about, we see this polling, which is fabulous, right? And so how do I make sure that this person, for example, that has a job, 2 kids, the parents, and this and that, and they care a lot about this, but maybe they have 10 minutes a week, maybe have 15 minutes a week. How do I cut through that and make those 15 minutes for them meaningful, impactful? How do I rise that up? Because people tell us that they're interested, but from interest, del plato a la boca se cae la sopa. How do we go from, yes, I support this, pero ¿qué hago? ¿A quién le hablo? Where do I start? Right? So that's where we as a field need to do that. And if you, dear listener, are interested and have ideas on how to do that, just go do it. Go start. Somos montoneros, start your UMA, Unión de Mujeres Argüenderas. Just go and start, but also call your local people and ask them to help you. That's what we get resources to do.
Yeah, along those lines on staying inspired, there was a recent episode of Hidden Brain, which I will link in the show notes of this conversation. I will share it with you, Marce, that talks about this challenge. When we think about climate change, when we think about ocean conservation, when we think about these issues, they are very daunting, right? There's some approaches have been a scare tactic, right? Of doom, it's over. And that actually has resulted in people feeling so overwhelmed that they feel like they can't make a difference. And instead of inspiring people to take action, it sort of defeats them and say, well, there's nothing I can do. So what have been some of the strategies that you've seen have worked that are inspirational? Sounds like you're recognizing that there could be more room to improve on this. But yeah, or maybe even bringing it to you personally. How do you stay inspired in this issue when it can feel like so much doom and gloom?
There's a couple of things. I would tell you that there's the pre-motherhood and the post-motherhood, right? So pre-motherhood was a little bit more abstract because it's okay, how do I do this? How do I stay involved? And we talked about it in the previous invitation to Tamarindo that soy bien terca, I no me mueves. I will not move because I will be, if I move, even if I'm gonna lose. And sometimes as the executive director, you have to have this risk assessment, but I'm just not one to give up just because, right? So even if I could go down kicking and screaming, pues no, que les cueste. I'm not going to move aside, ni modo, right? So I just I have this deep innate sense of justice of no, esto está mal, this is wrong. There's no reason I should make it easier for them. And understanding, and we see this with this new administration and with this flood the zone situation and the barrage of things and attacks on institutions and people and media, etc. So there's one, seeing through that and recognizing that. There's another one, which is, and this is what I kept coming back to in the weeks after the election and trying to rally our employees and our team members and our colleagues, etc. And I am inspired by our history. What do I mean? And what I told them was, listen, this is not right. Us having to deal Latinas having to deal with this. It is not right. It is not fair, but it is possible. Okay. We have decades in our collective history, in our countries of origin, in our families' country of origins of withstanding and overcoming dictatorships, totalitarianism, racism, nonsense. It's not right. It's not fair, but it is entirely and fully possible. So I take inspiration of that. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's always that, you know what? I am made for this. I am when we talk about like our ancestors' wildest dreams, like, no, we've got this. Like, I hate that I had to deal with this. I hate that I'm having to like go through this, but I got it. Like we can. And I look back and I read all the 60s and 70s books, and I read my history, and I like listen to podcasts, and I like go through that and like get inspired in how people did it. Because sometimes it's so dark and it's so hard to see the path forward. And at the same time, you have to remember that some of these people probably did feel the same way, probably have the same thing. And adding to that there was not like the ease of connection, the ease of like leveraging each other's impact, the ease of like finding other people that were probably like-minded, because you had, like media control and no independent or very little media. And so I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by art. Music is where I go all the time, all day. And now that I am a mother, well, I mean, I don't really have a choice to give up.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have a kindergartner. It's not a choice.
Yeah, we've got a future to protect for the next generation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been really inspiring, and I'm sure people are hearing the passion that you have for this work, and will hopefully get connected. And of course, we'll have in our show notes how people can get connected to Azul. Now I want to pivot to our closing questions, rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what is one thing you're celebrating? And it could be, trivial, it could be huge, whatever it is. What is one thing that you're giving your matraca to?
Somebody, and it's actually very huge. I literally just saw this, and I've been thinking about it all week, and I could not articulate it. I am celebrating the fact that the discussion and the critique of this whole Emilia Perez, to go back to this, has been entirely done. And somebody said, la funamos sin ser transfóbicos. The fact that this discussion has been deep, specific, and I would like to think there was no dead naming, there was no, transphobia, etc. So I think that is like a big matraca for everybody, because I don't know if that would have happened even a year ago, 2 years ago. So that's really awesome to be able to have like hard discussions, critiques, without like, falling into stupidity and transphobia.
I love that. That is definitely something to celebrate, that the progress that we can hold two truths. Like we could say this movie has a lot of problems, and you know what? I'm also happy to see trans representation. Like you can hold the two truths, and I love that. Yeah, I think that's really great. Okay, so my matraca is super silly, but I just purchased really soft pajamas, and I also they're so soft and nice, and I also purchased really beautiful slippers, and I love both. So.
I have claustrophobic feet, so I have like a ton of slippers, but I never wear them. But I feel you on the pajamas.
Yes. And I'm not one for slippers either, but when you have to walk your dog and it's like kind of cold, I just want something that I slip into. So I got slippers that have like nice soles. So
oh yeah, like the real ones you can actually walk outside in.
Yes, and I love them. So, and the other silly matraca goes to Pedro Pascal, because I just love him. He's a beautiful human being. And if you see, like recently, he's been posting, well, of course, he's very LGBTQ inclusive. And recently in his stories, he was also celebrating it, New York City. Recently, a lot of Mexicans came together in Times Square because Mexicans have been the number one number of folks that are getting deported, probably by virtue of the fact that most Latinos in the U.S. are of Mexican descent. It's just the truth. So I've seen just that solidarity of him just lifting up our community. So all of that. Pedro Pascal, you're just a dream. So my matraca goes to him. All right. So then what goes in la basura? What are you canceling? What are you done with? What is something you're just like, ugh, a la basura right now?
The lukewarmness, ¿cómo se dice? La tibieza, the lukewarmness of like Latinas online talking about and minimizing the struggles of immigrant communities and their response to like the raids and kind of like, I came here the right way. So I don't know where the heck my like algorithm went that way. And I'm getting a lot of those like hashtag Latinos for Trump. So a la basura, like, you know, whatever, like but my family came here the right way. And then we got like, you know, they're Cuban. I'm like, let's talk real talk. Right. So like, I would say the self-righteousness, lack of empathy, and lack of like historical context, va a la basura. Like, ¿de qué te ganas? Like, I'm trying to understand what they get out of like pledging this fealty, like, you know, like holding up, like, ¿quién te preguntó?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, basura.
Basura to all of that. What I'm going to put in la basura is the troubling trend that I'm seeing is that the lies that are coming out of the White House and the right are just so ridiculous. And sometimes those of us that want to spread the truth instead of the lies fall into a trap of repeating the lie in our effort to then say, this is a myth, here's the fact, here's the myth, here's the fact. And there's a danger in that because there could be, first of all, they're all lying to themselves. They lie to themselves all day long. But when we call out the lie by leading with the lie, you're now introducing the lie into an audience that wasn't aware of this fucking bullshit to begin with. So please, y'all, when you are trying to lead with facts, lead with the facts. Start with the facts. You don't need to repeat the lie to get your point across. So let's all be responsible when we want to make sure that people are informed about the correct information. You do not need to repeat the lie. So the basura goes to repeating the lies. Okay.
And I will say, back in my life, and I know you've done this work too, like communications consulting and that sort of thing. This is like one of the first things that you get on your communications training. It's like, assuming that you have like 10 seconds on TV and you have airtime, do not spend one of those seconds giving them airtime. So forget about that. Think about it this way. Only think about the part that you want to say and don't repeat their part, because that's taking time away from what you want to say.
Yes. And I see so many reputable people, reputable sites and organizations fall into this trap. So let's just be more aware and call it out, y'all. If you see it, let people know that this is not the right approach for it.
And hire your trusty, fabulous communications consultants and professionals to help you with that if you need to.
Yes. Okay. So then you all kind of referenced a little bit about your inspiración, but we like to end with that. What is giving you inspiration this week?
Latin ska.
Tell us about this.
I am a forever dyed-in-the-wool, Pablo's Cadillacs, Panteon Rococo, and I will say I'm one of the things that I'm dealing with this week is a very, very, very close friend of mine passed away after dealing with cancer, and it's just been literally days. And I just wanted to go back into a place of like, oh, what did she enjoy, and et cetera. And one of my last conversations with her was actually talking about music. So I went back and like started like obviously like the Bad Bunny record, literally like Save Me a Record, I don't know, album. So that literally one of our last conversations like last week about that. And so I went on that little rabbit hole of music. And so I started with Bad Bunny, then I went into like the Fania All-Stars, and then because I have ADD, like, anyways, I ended up in Panteon Rococo and Salón Victoria and Los Pueblos Skylarks. So I've been dancing a lot and just kind of like rocking out to like 90s and 2000 Latin ska.
I think that's beautiful. And I'm so sorry for your loss. And that's a really wonderful and beautiful way to honor someone by celebrating what they loved. I think that's great. I think it's a beautiful place to end this conversation with. And my inspiración is you and your work. So we're going to let people know how they can get connected. And we're so grateful that you're there on the front lines to ensure that our community is represented when it comes to ocean conservation and climate and defending our climate, that is changed. All right. Thank you, Marce. It was so great to see you and great to have you. Ciao. Ponte un suéter is how I sign off here. Okay. Ciao. Tamarindo Podcast is Brenda Gonzalez and Delsy Sandoval. We are also the show's executive producers. Jeff Ricards wrote our theme song. Sonoro Media's Karina Riveroll provides production support, and Cliva Torres edits our episodes for YouTube. The best way to support our work is to rate and review Tamarindo or share an episode with a friend. Get in touch with us at tamarindopodcast.com.
I'm not gonna lie, you're slacking. You're slacking on starting that business you've been holding off on. It's just living in your head, and if you don't act now, that idea is gonna leave, or maybe someone's gonna take that idea. And there's a tool that I personally use, and that is Shopify. You don't need to be a web designer. You can just start moving, zooming in, adding the text you need, adding pictures you need, and Shopify has so many templates you can use from. Get it out of your head and onto a website with Shopify. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sell. They make it easy to manage growing your business. They help with details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on all the important stuff like growing your business. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/sonoro, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/sonoro to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/sonoro.